the reason that I decided to do this is not purely because of wild, uninformed speculation and uninformed FUD on Bittensor over the last few days, but I won't deny that it was a catalyst. What I found listening to a lot of people's opinions was that it was very clear that there are a lot of people coming in new to this network who don't actually have a fundamental understanding of where we are, what's going on with the network, and the potential of what we're doing. And worse than that, there's often misinformed, echoed opinions floating around which don't do the potential of what we're doing or what the network is doing justice. So that's really what I want to do. For a lot of people who are obviously present in the network, founders of the network, building on the network, this will be a little bit of an Eli 5, and feel free to tune off, go back to your families and friends. This is really aimed at people who don't have much of an understanding what Bittensor is, and I'm hoping that this can be replayed when you want to clue up for Thanksgiving dinner to explain to your grandma what the hell it is, this decentralized artificial intelligence network that everyone is talking about. So I will start very quickly, as some people might wonder, who on earth am I? Because I'm not from the foundation. I didn't create the network. I'm not an AI or machine learning engineer. I don't have a computer sciences degree. However, I've been involved in this network for about a year and a half. I'm the founder of Taostats. Taostats is a data analytics and blockchain explorer for the network. To just have a blockchain explorer for a network like Bittensor does not do it justice. We really need to understand how all of the participants within the network are behaving, are functioning, and that's what Taostats does. I also am co-designer and founder of a couple of the more popular subnets, and also Corcel, which is a company that provides API access to the network, data on the network, and also some applications built on top of that API access. Today, I am here, however, wearing my Taostats hat, which means I will do my absolute best to be impartial, not to push my own agenda other than my own, hopefully, unbiased opinions. Let's see how that goes. So let's start with the network. Bittensor, this has come up today. Who are the founders? Who are they even? They are very much doxed. You have Jacob Steves and Ala Shabana. Both you can do your research into. I'm not here to give you a full rundown. They are both fully doxed online. You can see their history, where they've been, where they came from, and they founded Bittensor based on a concept of being able to decentralize and distribute compute in order at this time to aid in the training and fine-tuning of AI models. That was the original direction that Bittensor was taken, or what it was created in. And I'm just going to sort of talk about this original architecture, how it's made up, and then fast forward, filling you in as to how we got to where we are. So this is what I'm going to do first of all, talk a little bit about the network, then I'll take some questions on it, hopefully not too technical. Then we'll talk about the participants of the network. We'll talk about Tau a little bit. We'll talk about the value of the network, what's actually going on the network right now, and where we see the network heading. I'm just going to improve some people there. So the original architecture of the network. The original network had what we now refer to as subnets, but it was essentially the network. And within the network, there were 4,096 slots, shall we say. We call them UIDs, so basically slots, participants on the network. I'll talk about those participants later, but they are validators and miners. And the network exists in sort of what I consider to be three layers, sort of the meat in the sandwich. You have the computational data layer. That is the interactions between validators and miners. It is not on a blockchain. There's no limitations on the interactions between validators and miners. You say, oh, what's your TPS? I know a lot of that's transactions per second. Is often used to measure the limitations and capacity of blockchain networks. That doesn't apply to Bittensor. The miners and the validators communicate directly with each other. We'll talk a little bit more about that interaction a little bit later, but that's one of the fundamental aspects that often is misunderstood in the network when thinking of it as a crypto project. And it is not a crypto project. It has a token. It's an incentivized network, which for me has always summed it up as one of those true use cases of blockchain. I take it back a little bit, actually. To looking at something like BitTorrent. No one will admit to downloading torrents if I ask them, but we all have quite likely downloaded torrents. And if any of us are of a certain age where we remember things like LimeWire and torrents really coming into prevalence, we remember things like our seed ratio. Your seed ratio was how long you had uploaded that torrent for afterwards, and it was after you had finished leeching it, downloading it, and it was a kind of a badge of honor, I would say. You'd say, "Oh, look at me! My seed ratio is 14." That would mean you had uploaded 14 times the size of that torrent to other people. But the problem is, no, after a while, where there's so many people sharing these torrents, no one really cares because it wasn't incentivized. No one was incentivized to keep participating for the good of the network. Reason being, blockchain didn't exist in order to have a decentralized incentivization, something fair that everyone can trust. Turns out a distributed ledger or a blockchain is actually the perfect vehicle in order to achieve that. So this is why often I make this initial comparison between the way the network works and uses incentivization and blockchain rather than just being a crypto project. It should be noted, completely fair launch for the token. The tokenomics pretty much mirror to a T Bitcoin. On purpose. There is a great amount of respect and say maximalism. It's not for me to say, but in the founders, in terms of their alignment to Bitcoin. So we have this computational data layer, and then we have the incentivization layer, and that incentivization layer is the blockchain element. And what that does is uses a distributed ledger, an immutable ledger to record incentivization. If you're going to go around scoring people on a network and handing out rewards, which are termed as the emissions, you better make sure that it's a point of truth, it's verifiable, and it's on a blockchain, and everyone can access that. And that is what the incentivization layer is. It's a substrate-based blockchain. It's not a parachain, as often people are led to believe. The network did win a parachain slot. They were great fans of the ecosystem of Substrate and did consider becoming a parachain, but in the end, for freedom of development, as far as I'm aware, and the freedom to develop the code base and Substrate subtensor in the way that they wanted, it was chosen not to fulfill or not to take up that parachain slot. So it is a Substrate blockchain, but it's not a parachain. And then you have the consensus mechanism, UMA consensus. This is essentially, I kind of look at it as the glue that holds it together. It's what allows value to be attributed to the intelligence, the commodities being produced within the computational layer, and write that as incentive on the blockchain. So let's get this one. I'll just sort of keep it there. So you've got your computational data layer, the communication between miners and validators, the participants of the network, the incentivization layer, which is essentially the attributing of value and recording that within a blockchain, and then UMA consensus, which actually performs that action. It's a consensus mechanism that allows the validators to achieve an overall, I call it an incentive landscape, an overall view of the value of the commodity being created on the network. I feel at this point I should probably ask if anyone has any questions at that stage. If I have to open this up, I think I do. Give me a second. Let me open this up and see what happens. I should now be able to allow anyone to speak. Let's see what happens. Oof. Can anyone speak?
No questions, mate.
Perfect. No questions. I'm just going to leave it open and see what happens. So this is the basic, and I think most people here do understand the basic structure of the Bittensor ecosystem. So then we need to look at the participants. The participants are often, again, misconstrued because, of course, coming from a crypto orientation, which a lot of people do, perspective, you hear the word validator, you hear the word miner, and you have a preconception as to what sort of a role they would take within a network. I'm not here to explain what validators and miners do within the traditional sense of networks, but I think we all have a fair understanding of that. Within Bittensor, it's slightly different. The validators and the miners are performing two crucial roles within the network. The miners are performing the work, as if we often call it. They are performing the task governed by the in the initial sense, the single network. Now, although I'll get onto it, the multiple subnets, the task of work that is defined by the part of the network in which they sit, and the validators verify this work to ensure that it is performed correctly, as it should be, and then they score it and value it against the other participants, the other miners who are also producing these same tasks. So I think just to fast forward very, very quickly, obviously I spoke that initially Bittensor had a single network. I think we are all aware at this point there are multiple subnets. I'll come and cover those shortly. But now when I talk about the relationship between miners and validators, it's important to understand that now they exist on individual subnets. The network started off as a single network, evolved into 2 or 3 subnetworks, and then I would say, what do we know, about 4 months ago, allowed the creation of these subnetworks by anyone. We'll get a little bit more into that later, but currently, at the current count, there are 32 slots for subnets, and each one is an individual network within the network, producing its own commodity, having its own set of miners, its own set of validators, and its own set of rules. So when I talk about how the miners and the validators interact, it's within the confines of each individual subnet. So to give you an example, in an inference subnet, the validators would be asking questions of the miners. The miners would receive those prompts. The miners would receive those prompts. They would submit responses, and the validators, depending on the design of the incentive mechanism, would score those responses based on the criteria that they wish, be it similarity of responses, diversity of responses, speed of response, or, as often is the case, a combination of multiple factors. And this is the beauty of subnet design that I'll come to later. So this is what miners and validators are doing. Now, for instance, in the instance of something like a storage subnet, the miners, their work, their role is to provide storage. So actually what's then happening is the validators are verifying that the miners are providing storage, and then any other criteria they may have, such as latency, uptime, and any other things that you would want to score a distributed set of storage nodes on in order to reward them accordingly for being the best. And they then validate that and score accordingly. I have to quit WhatsApp because my ex-wife is making it. So that is really the role of the validators and the miners, and it varies from subnet to subnet. And we could look at each individual subnet. I'll just give a couple more sort of more varied ones. We have something like subnet 8, where the miners are essentially running prediction models to predict the price of assets. And in that particular instance, because they are real world predictions, the validators are able to score them based on the actual outcome. Tell me what the price of Bitcoin is going to be in 5 minutes time. Okay, hold on 5 minutes. Okay, I actually know who was right. So that's another instance of the miners producing some work and the validators scoring them on that work. You have fine tuning and pre-training, where essentially the miners are competing to perform essentially the best to perform the best training, the best fine tuning of the model. And in those particular instances, it's actually a much smaller group of miners who are rewarded. I call it a winner takes all subnet, because in these scenarios, there is a winner or a smaller group of winners. So these are what the validators and the miners are doing. And it's very, very different between subnets, especially for miners. And this is where a lot of confusion comes in, especially when people say, oh, I'd like to validate and I'd like to mine. So I'm going to talk about the barrier to entry and what the actual setup and structure of being a validator and being a miner actually is. A validator, the most important thing that a validator needs in order to be a validator is Tau. The Tau is the access, their gateway access to the network. Because of the way Yuma consensus works, it gives a natural order of priority to those with more Tau. The more Tau you have, the greater access you have to network, the greater weight your opinion has, your scores. When you set weights, the act of setting weights, as it's called, is assigning your scores to miners, to the participants. And the more Tau you have, essentially, it's like almost a reputation metric in a way, if you think of it in such a way. The more importance your scores have within the consensus of all of the validators. So what this means as a validator is you need to have Tau, be it your own Tau or Tau assigned to you through the delegation of stake. Another interesting vocabulary similarity to proof of stake chains. It's called staking. We're so used to staking. Within Bittensor, we often call it delegating. You delegate your stake. That's like saying, here you go, I'll give you my Tau, and I put it on your validator to add more authority to your validator, because I believe that your validator represents my ideals and operates within the network in a way that I want. Of course, there are returns for delegating that we'll talk about in a minute when I come to that role, that persona of the user. But for now, what the validator does is the validator builds up stake, and that gives them their position within the network. It is quite competitive. And there is now a fairly sizable barrier to entry. It's often spoken about what is the barrier to entry, and I'm not going to talk about the financial side. You can do the math yourselves. There used to be, I would say, a functional barrier of about 1,000 Tau. So you needed, if to get going and to not be ignored by miners, to have about 1,000 Tau. I would say now, and again, it depends from subnet to subnet, but a generally accepted level to be able to communicate and participate in the network and to be listened to by the miners, you probably need about 20,000 Tau. That doesn't have to be your own Tau. That could be delegated to you by a third party or multiple third parties, but that's the total stake, in my opinion, you now need to be a validator. So it's seen as probably one of the less easier roles to just come and assume. And I have this a lot. I receive emails from people and messages and say, "Oh, I'm interested in validating on this network. I validate on X, Y, and Z. Can I get going?" Your Tau and your stake is obviously your first barrier to entry. And the second one is in its current form, and I say in its current form because, as I'll discuss later, the network is thankfully constantly evolving and improving and moving forward. But in its current form, validators, in order to be competitive, which of course your delegators want you to be because it's their rewards, you must validate on every subnet that has emissions. If a subnet is rewarding its participants and you are not on that subnet, you are not taking home a share of the rewards that are there for you to grab. And if you're not there and you're not participating in that network, and not all validators participate in all subnetworks, but the top, say 10, absolutely ensure that they do. So what this means in the current landscape is you've got to run 32 validators. That's either 32 sets of sort of code on less than 32 machines, or the reality is very often 32 different machines. As in order to validate across the subnets and perform the task of validation actually varies. Often it requires GPU. More than often it requires GPU, but in some instances it doesn't. In order to just verify the results or score, you can actually often get away with running just a CPU machine. Miners, on the other hand, I would say most of the time they're required to run some kind of GPU based model. So that's what the validators are doing. The validators in the dawn of the network. We're going to get a question. In the dawn of the network, the validators were tasked with understanding that they had a responsibility to forward the growth of the network. And that, I would say, is a responsibility borne by the fact that they receive a commission from anyone that delegates. So you delegate to a validator, and let's an arbitrary number. If, as a validator, you were receiving 100 tokens back for an arbitrary period of time, as a delegator, you receive 82 tokens back for that arbitrary period of time, and the validator gets 18. So the validator commission is 18%. Again, this is not fixed for all eternity, and it's long been known that validators have a responsibility to build revenue generating business and infrastructure on top of the network. However, through the current incentivization state of the network, because they are essentially profiting from the delegation and from the stake, it affords them the ability to bootstrap, I'm going to say up until the creation of subnets, it primarily afforded them the responsibility of bootstrapping the growth of the network, which is exactly what was happening. Now we're going to come on to the miners. The miners and mining is probably the most accessible entry into the network if you want to get Tau. Obviously, if you just want to be a user or an investor or holder, we'll come to those in a minute. But as a participant of the network, anyone can mine. There is a realistic barrier to entry that you're probably going to need a credit card to secure a GPU machine or a GPU machine at home. You're probably going to require a little bit of Tau in order to make your first registration, because you must register your slot on any subnetwork. But that said, if you research the network, you find subnets with very low barriers to entry. You play around on testnet so you understand what it is that you're doing. All that is required is that you understand the required workload of that subnet, and you're able to perform it at a level competitive with the other participants of that subnet. So to explain that a little bit better, with the exception of subnet 1 that has 1,024 participants, all of the current subnets have 256 participants, 256 slots that you can get into. There are 64 slots reserved for miners, but in reality, only about 40 of them are taken up. Sorry, again, there are 64 slots reserved for validators, but the reality is there's only about 40 slots taken up by the validators. And so you've got just over 200 slots available for miners. And what happens, and although these these parameters, or hyperparameters as they're called, can be set and changed between subnets. I'm going to give this explanation with just assuming we're using the default set of hyperparameters for subnet. Every epoch, an epoch being 360 blocks, or 250, 250, 260. It's a variable hyperparameter. Let's, for argument's sake, call it about 72 minutes. The least performant miners are ejected from the network by the default number is 3, although I believe a greater majority of subnets at the moment set it as 1 or 2. So essentially the least performant miner loses his slot, and that allows the registration of a new miner. So what happens is you have a constant churn where the least performant participants are dropped off, and those that are doing the best stay, which obviously provides a natural evolution of the quality of the output and the work increases, or ensures that it doesn't drop below an unacceptable base level. And it basically promotes a natural competition within the participants. And as a miner, it means if you manage to stay out of that bottom percentile of miners, you can continue to earn Tau. And what happens is there is a cost to register on the network. Let's say, for argument's sake, it's 1 Tau. And you earn Tau. Let's say, for argument's sake, you earn half a Tau a day. The decision, in order to be a profitable miner, is will I be able to stay on this network long enough to have paid off my registration fee and any running costs I have, and then start to earn Tau. And so, if a registration cost is 1 Tau and I'm earning half a Tau a day, and let's say it costs me a little bit to run my hardware and the value of my time, I find when I try and work this out, you usually see that miners work it out by about 3 to 5 days is what they would consider an acceptable period of time in order to become profitable. If you're confident in your ability to stay on a network. It varies from subnet to subnet. And what happens is, as a subnet becomes more popular and more in demand for by the miners, normally as a result of greater rewards, which I'll come to later, the price of registration increases to a point that people stop registering, and then it reaches an equilibrium. So it's one of the many examples of natural market forces in play, supply and demand, within the subnet registration. But what it means is, as a miner, you have a task to perform, but you also have an economic choice and a risk and reward to make in terms of actually turning a profit. There's no point in just registering 100 keys if you're not going to be able to run them to the point that they make profit. So it's better. It allows people to start slowly. Of course, if someone understands how to perform work at the optimum level within a subnet, then they can register multiple keys and they can run what we consider to be a successful mining operation. There have always been controversies as to what is the ethical way to mine, whether one should stop at a certain number of keys, whether if someone who holds a majority share as a miner of a subnet, whether they're doing anything wrong, if they're producing the optimum work for the network. This is a discussion, I think, far more depth for this talk, but let's just touch on the different angles that can be taken. First of all, subnets themselves can design into their mechanism parameters that don't allow a single participant to have too many keys just within the actual parameters of the code. Code is law, so if it's not possible, then that's a very good way to stop the taking over of a network. And on the flip side of that, if the network is producing the optimum highest quality version of the commodity that's being demanded from it, then is it a problem? Should someone's ability to do something well be limited by others' inability to do it in the interest of obviously keeping a level playing field, but not allowing, how far can someone go to profit on a meritocracy? As I said, this is a discussion for a completely different spaces. So I think we will leave that one there. And as I say, mining, it's a smallest barrier to entry. You just need a little bit of power to get your key and a little bit of knowledge. However, it's not easy. And this is the biggest criticism we have. I see people all over forums and potentially criticizing, saying, where's the guide for mining? Why has no one explained to me how to do it? Why is there no one-click miner? There are people who are going to come up with one-click miners. There are the potential that people will discover ways to have profitable business models from running mining pools. But the truth of the matter is, it's not like mining on any other network where you just run a script, set up some hardware and sit back and watch the money come in. It is a competitive process. You are given a base set of parameters. You are told this is the bare minimum of which you need to do in order to, or this is the outline of the task, which you need to do in order to perform on the subnet. However, anyone else who's performing as a miner is being given the exact same information, but whoever does it best gets the prize, or the majority. So when you start to understand that, you realize, well, there aren't giant miner groups of miners saying, hey, I'm doing this. What are you doing? I should share my little alpha with you. It's a natural dynamic, and there is competition. It is a competition to outperform your fellow participants. But what it is an open competition. Anyone, anywhere, on any level of any spectrum of any financial capability of any intellectual, racial, geographical background, as long as they can perform and access the network, it is a level playing field. And this is really what I've always found to be one of the most beautiful aspects of the network, in terms of really rewarding, and especially at this stage, rewarding those who put in knowledge, gain experience, versus those who can just throw money at the network. You can throw money at the Bittensor network. It is not going to reward you if you throw your time, your soul, your heart, and your knowledge. It's really one of these touching aspects that I like. So this is mining. We could again go on about mining for a very long time, but I think we'll move on. We're going to move on to a new persona, someone that only existed in the last 4 months, and it's become the sought after persona in the Bittensor ecosystem. And I would say, for me, the most powerful participants at the moment, because they are the ones who are going to take us to places that we can't even imagine yet. And they are the subnet creators. Because what the foundation did is the foundation produced a single subnet, human consensus, designed the network, played it out for pre-training and fine-tuning, pre-training, and then took a step back and thought, not sure if this is actually the best direction for the network. Let's prioritize inference, and then looked at how the network and this construct of the network worked for inference. You have the original subnet 1, and experienced, I would say, growing pains, learning difficulties, not learning difficulties, growing difficulties in understanding how this structure and what they made would be used. And eventually understood, which was, I think, one of the best decisions, or one of the best sort of evolutionary periods within the network, that there was much more to be gained from putting out the template of what they've done. So this is what we've done. This is how we've done it. This is how we've decided to design this mechanism. These are the building blocks. Now go away and you do it. Take this and see what you can do with it. You have 32 slots. Anyone can fill it. Anyone can write an incentive mechanism, a rewards mechanism, a subnet design, and let's see what you can do. Because it's all very easy to criticize what the foundation doing. Oh, they're doing this. I would do it better. Well, there you go. The ball was put in everyone's court. And suddenly we had 32 slots, and along came subnet creators. Now, I talked about validators being those that were trusted with through financial incentive to bootstrap the growth of the network. Well, the moment that subnet creators came in, and I will talk in a little bit about Tau and the actual flow of Tau, but let's just say for now, running a subnet, if it's successful, is immensely profitable. It is profitable. It allows you to grow. It allows you to fund a team. It allows you to fund a business, and it is rewarding. There's no doubt about it. How the dynamics as a network will play out into the future, and how these rewards will continue, is not something that I wish to speculate on now. I always prefer to discuss at the moment. Well, at the very end, but I prefer to discuss what we have in front of us in the code as hard fact right now. So running a subnet is an honor, a responsibility. It's no easy task. And what happened is we suddenly had 32 subnets. Anyone can register a subnet. It doesn't actually cost anything. In order to register a subnet, you only have to lock up your TAO. If your subnet fails and you get deregistered, you get your TAO back again. The TAO gets unlocked. However, much like the registration process for a mining key, every time a subnet is registered, the price increases. There are actual parameters that define by how much the increase is. That define the scope of the increase. Essentially, the price doubles each time, and then it degrades over a variable period of time. This has just been reduced to make the degradation slightly slower. That's something I'll discuss later. So what we initially had were 32 open slots. The foundation initially had subnet 1 and subnet 11. And there was a gentleman called Creative Builds who had been developing an image subnet, and this was immediately put into subnet 5, and the rest of the subnet slots were empty. And those of you who have heard me talk about this over the last few months will have heard me use the term subnet wave 1. I also use other words to describe it, but I'm going to keep it as subnet wave 1, because suddenly everybody realized that they could jump on board and build a subnet. And this is a double-edged sword. We got spurts of innovation, but we also got spurts of complacency. A lot of, and I'm going to be honest about this, this is my take on it. I feel now we're out the other side. I feel free to talk about this in public, but a lot of people realized that if you jumped on and built a subnet, there was a revenue stream that was coming. And because the slots were empty, as long as you could afford to lock up the TAO for the registration slots, you could get your slot and figure it out from there. And chances are it's going to take a little bit of time for all the slots to fill up. And wing it and see where you get to. That's not to say that was a bad choice for many, and we've had some great subnets come out of it. But what eventually happened is we reached the point where we have all 32 slots full. Now we're in a competitive stage of subnet creation, where in order to put a new subnet onto the Bittensor network, another subnet must die. And what this is now enabling us to do is to flush out the less performant subnets. And I say this because someone has a mic not muted. I say this because it's very easy for people to pick up on some of the less performant subnets to criticize the network. But what they forget is that this is an open, free economy where anyone had the right to eject a subnet. And building a subnet, regardless, is no simple task. The foundation put out a template. It was a sort of a template of what they had used to build the subnet 1, I believe, or a stripped back version of it. And a lot of people sort of grabbed that template and tried to apply that to as many different forms of intelligence creation, commodity creation as they could. Much in the same way in the earlier days of Ethereum and the ICO craze, anyone thought of any way in which they could use blockchain to solve a problem. Didn't always need blockchain to solve the problem, and not all of the subnets that were initially created actually required or worked within the form that they were deployed within the Bittensor network. That said, some good subnets did start to come. I will talk about specific subnets later, but what I just want you to understand is that through this innovation, people started to take a step back and look at the subnet design and think, hold on a minute, what are the parameters with which I'm working and what can I really do? And because the network is not something you can just flip through a manual in half a day and figure out, it takes a little bit of time. You have to get your hands dirty. And so often when you're coming into something new, you need to see what others are doing around you. So it's taken some time. I mean, we say taken time. 4 months in Bittensor feels like 4 years to those of us that are within the network. It's been 4 months, literally. And we are now looking at innovative subnet designs that we wouldn't even have conceived 4 months ago. And I can personally tell you from discussions internally within what we're doing and from what other people are doing, this is only the beginning. There is research and discussions being done on far more innovative designs for subnets. I will get to that a little bit later. But what this does is it gives you the role of the subnet creator. The subnet creator can be an existing individual or group or organization who understand, and it mostly is who understand that they can use the distributed network structure of Bittensor in order to produce or optimize the production of a machine intelligence or digital commodity in such a way that is more efficient, more scalable, more open, more decentralized than without access to the network. That's a broad way to try and encompass every subnet that I can think of. So that is what the creators do. And they are responsible for the code base for that specific subnet, maintaining it, updating it, and to an extent, providing access to all for that commodity. Because now that it's become much more competitive, as a subnet creator, you must be responsible for the code base, the marketing and publicity of your idea and your subnet, because running a subnet is very much, if you want to have the rewards and the revenue of a strong business, you must also run it like a business. So that the public marketing, the deployment, I'm going to say broadly speaking, the deployment of product. That really varies depending on the subnet itself, but everything has some form of a product, some way of producing value, whether it's a product in a traditional sense with end users or something that just has value to the greater participants of the network or of other networks. There is a product, there is value being created. And you must also market it within the network currently, because your position and your emissions, the size of the amount of tau that flows to you is currently, although this is also an evolutionary process, decided by the validators within the network. I say there are 32 subnets. There is actually a root subnet, a subnet 0, whose sole purpose is, I'm going to say governance. It's the governance of the emissions. It uses a basic form of UMA consensus that allows the validators to assign weights or scores to distribute the overall emissions, which I'll come to in a minute, the overall flow of tau between the subnets based on the value that those subnets are producing. The overall goal for this is that this will be a natural market decision. It will be decided by fluidity, by natural markets, without having to have a human intervention. But with anything that such as Bittensor, a network decentralization doesn't just, well, you can throw it just into the deep end into some sort of anarchic state and see what happens. But if you want something to work, there needs to be an overseeing hand of guidance. And currently, it's the validators, the people that have been in the network, who have the largest stake in the network, who are responsible for understanding the value of what these subnets are doing, and helping guide those that are bringing the network in a direction that we all want, towards a state in which there is enough throughput, enough capacity going through the network and usage that we can then allow natural market forces to take effect. And we've got the other two users. I might as well bring them up. I just put them at the bottom, the holders and the users. The holders, I could call them the investors. I feel I put them as the holders because I want them to have more of a vested interest in what the network is doing. Obviously, in a standard traditional investment capacity, buy coin, hold coin, stake coin, get profit, sell high, buy low. I think we all know where this is going. However, the holders within the Bittensor network actually have the power to control or have a say in the growth of the network. In the initial days, it was quite simply choose the validator that represents where you would like the network to grow, who is giving the most value back to the network. Now, it's an open door. There are some validators that prioritize the profitability of the returns of these holders, and it is what it is. And there are others who are building things. There are others who are producing commodities off the network. So whether it's marketing, whether it's publicity, whether it's ambassadorial roles for the network itself, everyone, most of the validators have found their place and what they do. And as holders, you can choose, and you don't have to choose one, and you can distribute your Tau between those that you feel are contributing to the network in the way that holds true to you. However, moving into the future, holders will have to take will be encouraged to take a more active role in actually guiding their Tau towards the subnets that they believe are showing the most value, the most potential for value, deserve their support. The dynamics and the mechanics of this are still to be 100% defined. But essentially, the reason I single out the holders now as an actual participant is their role should and will be increased, which is why it's so important to do talks like this and to start to educate people and make people understand the different participants and the role of the participants within the network. It shouldn't be just a passive hold. You have power to guide the network in the direction that you want, which is something that's very, very unique within this network. A little drink there. And then the final ones, and these are the fun ones, the users. The users of the network. They don't need to know anything about the network. They don't even need to know they're using the network. Some may, depending on the way that you need to interface with the commodities being produced. But the ideology that we've always undertaken in some of the avenues products that we're producing is that a user can use a product built on Bittensor in the same way that a user of the internet uses a product that utilizes TCP/IP or any of the internet protocols. You don't know what those protocols are, what that infrastructure is built on. You just use an app that's built on the internet. And so there will be a huge amount of people who interact with the network or interact with products that are built and interfacing with the network that will have absolutely no idea. They won't have to hold Tau unless the design facilitates that there is an option for them to do so. They won't have to understand how the network works. They won't have to listen to their spaces back again to understand any of this. They won't have to have a say in the value. They simply will be users of products built or monopolizing the commodities produced by the Bittensor network. They are the users. Any questions? Right. I don't even know if I've given anyone the right to speak, so we'll go for no questions now. We'll talk about Tau. Let's have a little talk about Tau. Tau, of course, is the token emitted by the network. To understand the tokenomics, you only have to look at Bitcoin, or you can go onto the tokenomics page of Taostats. 21 million tokens will be created in total. The last token, we will all long be dead. The first halvening at 10.5 million tokens will be currently in October 2025. However, this is an elongating time frame because I spoke about Tau being used for registrations. When you register as a miner or a validator for your slot on a subnet, you pay a cost. This is not burned. This is recycled. That means that the Tau that is paid to register is put back into the unissued tau pot, essentially. 7,000 tau emitted per day. When I checked the other day, 638 had been used to be recycled, or used by registration costs, or recycled in that 24-hour period. So it's just under 10%, about 8% of the daily tau. My personal calculations, I think we'll probably see the first halvening in early to mid December. Let's see how the network grows. That's just an off-the-cuff calculation I made based on the current recycle rate. So it's 7,200 tau per day. That means 1 every 12 seconds, 1 every block. Basically, a block is 12 seconds. Or a block is on average 12 seconds, assuming the blocks are being produced at the optimal time. But for this example, 1 every 12 seconds. Where does that tau go? So, for every tau produced, it is split up between all of the different subnets as defined in currently subnet 0, essentially the emissions weighting between the subnets, currently decided by the validators using a form of consensus, eventually to be decided by natural market forces and the participants, or the greater set of participants of the network. But let's just say, for example's sake, that the subnet we are going to look at has 10% of the network emissions. Easy number to look at. That means in a day, that subnet will receive 720 tau. That means in a block, they will receive 0.1. And that tau gets split up between the subnet creator and the validators and the miners and the stakers, we call those who delegate their tau. And it gets split up like this. Before anything happens, the subnet creator gets 18% off the top. That is the fee for creating or for running and looking after the code base and maintaining and funding the running of a subnet. 18% off the top. What's left is split 50-50 between the miners and the validators. The side that goes to the miners, that is simply split between the miners based on their incentive score, how well they are performing. You can go into the subnet, we call it the metagraph. The metagraph is essentially a tabular form of looking at a subnet at any given point in time to see how all the participants are performing. And there are metrics within that that define how well you're doing. And that tau, that half that is sent over to the miners, is divided out based on how well they are performing on the network at that given time. The other 50% or 41%, once you've taken away the subnet owner's cut, is given to the validator. If all the tau that the validator had was their own, and they didn't have any delegation, that would all go to them. But of course, as we all know, validators have huge amounts of delegation, other people's tau given to them, of which they take their 18% cut off the top, and the rest flows down to the delegators. So that is how the tau flows. However, what is the value of that tau, and where does it end up? Well, as I originally explained, and one of the unique things with this network, when people complain, tau is a shitcoin, it's got no liquidity, you can't trade it anywhere. Why? Because 89%, 88%, between 88 and 90% consistently over the last year is delegated. It is illiquid because its value is in providing gateway access to the subnets. That's what it is. It is access to the data. Its production comes about through the creation of a digital commodity. That is how it's created. In order to create the tau, something must be made of value, and it's sort of tied to that creation of value. We make a point of never being mean to Bitcoin, so we're not going to say that Bitcoin does something similar, but without actually providing any value to the hashes that are being created, because we respect Bitcoin. We don't want to go down that road. But Bittensor is different. Tau is different in that sense that there is real value being created for the issuance of each Tau. In order for a Tau to be issued, value must be created, and it is then trickled down to all of the participants of the network to reward them for their participation in the creation of the value, in the validation of the value of the value, or for providing access in order to participate through the delegation of stake. As the network starts to get more and more used, that delegation of stake and that value of Tau starts to become far more prevalent. At the moment, all of the validators can access the various different subnets, which I'll get onto in a little bit. We haven't reached a point of, I would consider, a network capacity is actually not the right word to say, because there isn't a network capacity. If I say that, people think, well, what happens when the network is full? It's not going to work anymore. Network capacity is exponential because, as I said, the network doesn't flow through the blockchain. The interactions between a miner and a validator are independent interactions between the two of them, direct communication. And someone asked me in an interview question on the weekend, do I think that Bittensor could become the next supercomputer? And to which my smart ass response was, you could have a subnet full of supercomputers. What you do with each node on a subnet is within the design of the subnet. So in inference sense, you could say, well, I've got 200 miners who are producing responses to prompts, each one running a model. What happens when they can't produce any more responses? Well, then the one who runs two models through a swarm of GPUs is going to gain more incentive until eventually, through natural progression, through incentivization, all of the miners will be running swarms of models. So in this sense, the value of Tau is, or as the network reaches the capacity, what it does is it performs a natural order of prioritization. And what that means is, as a miner, I am incentivized to respond or to provide more response and more bandwidth from a percentage, from a proportional manner to those that have more Tau. Only to the point of their proportion of Tau. I must then still also respond to other validators and within the network. But what it means is that the Tau that you hold as a validator has a great importance and a great value, and anyone wishing to access data within the network needs to have not Tau in that traditional sense to pay, but needs to be going through someone who has Tau. So the accumulation of Tau in order to secure that bandwidth is really where the value of Tau lies. And this is often something that's difficult for people to grasp and understand, because they say, well, do I need Tau to access the network? Well, as a user or a holder, no, you don't. I mean, it's possible that we could charge in Tau for API access, for data access, but that's merely a design choice. It's not the fundamentals of the network. However, in order to query that data through a validator, the validator needs to have Tau in order for their query to be prioritized over someone else's. Yeah, that's it. Any questions at this point before I go on to the final couple of sections? Anyone who thought this was going to be an hour was misguided. Oh, I've got some requests here of people who I can approve this group. Let's click them all. Okay, there you go. Any questions at all? Good. Right, in that case, oh, any questions? No. The value of the network. This is a very interesting one. People often wonder, well, how can I use the network? How does it work for me? Where's the value in it that I can understand? Currently, the value in the network is something that's quite hard to quantify, even internally as validators, the foundation, as we try and assign value to subnets. We have an internal conflict sometimes. Some things are very easy to assign value to. You look at something like inference, the number of prompts you can request, the number of users, the throughput. It's a very simple, how many credits do you want to buy for how many users that you have? it's an easy one to quantify. But then you look at things like the production or the fine tuning of open source models, the production of storage. Storage actually is probably slightly easier in this sense. And some of the more abstract uses of the network that are going on with certain subnets, research subnets, subnets that are pushing forward the bounds of what Bittensor can do, like subnet 1, but and not prioritizing a user base or a revenue stream immediately, which we understand is hugely beneficial, and more of these will come. So understanding the potential of the network and its current stage, which I'm hope that I've done within this talk, its current stage of evolution and where it's heading, helps you understand the limitless or hugely exponential growth in the value of the network and how that value could be perceived. And it's something that's being discussed and guided upon. That it's a huge priority that every subnet within a network produces value for all. It's very easy to think I'm going to make a subnet and it's going to work for me and my company. But if that's very limiting. What we want to see is subnets that you may build a product for yourself on top of. You may be able to tap into that value that's being produced, but the value that is being produced by subnets needs to reach further than just a single entity's reward structure, internal revenue structure. And when we speak, we a lot of people think about Bittensor. It's an AI network. It's a machine intelligence network, decentralized machine intelligence network, incentivized. And then there was a period where we started to use the word. It's actually a digital commodities market. You don't have to produce machine intelligence. Turns out that machine intelligence AI is probably one of the more optimum use cases for distributed GPU. GPU is one of the digital powerhouse commodities that we most need to distribute due to its scarcity, its cost, its non-practicality for businesses that all invest in huge amounts of GPU. So we do tend to lean towards a machine learning AI-based infrastructure and network, but we're not fixed to it. And it's helpful to look at the output of subnets as commodities. It helps us understand then the balance and supply and demand that will come for those commodities, how they may shift dependent on the demand of the use base, and also the evolution of the artificial intelligence industry as a whole. Because bear in mind, we think we know where we are now, but where we are now compared to where we were a couple of years ago and where we'll be in a couple of years' time, I think we live in an age. I'm not going to say that I am old enough to remember the birth of the internet, and I remember pre-internet and the rate of change and growth. And where we are now, we're living in a time of huge growth and innovation. So to think that we know where we're heading, I think would be naive. But we have some ideas, and I feel that this network is there to help that growth and to ensure that it's open and fostered by all the benefits of open source. I get asked this question a lot. I don't like to go down too much of a philosophical rant about open source decentralization. I feel that then I start to put in too much of my own personal opinion and bias. But it's often the one that just needs to be pointed out is the benefits of having this open source network, because the network I haven't mentioned it this far, is open source. The Bittensor core code is there for you to look at. It's there for you to modify. Subtensor, which is the substrate blockchain aspect, is open source. Although the creation of it is by the foundation, and a lot of the current control over what makes it in and out is geared to to be overseen by the foundation. This is a gentle, slow relinquishing of control as more and more expertise comes into the community, and more people who are incentivized and responsible and of a level to contribute to this code base and make it better for the good of everyone. This is open source, and the same thing with subnets. A lot of the things, I think the only thing that remains then closed are these end products, which is a standard sort of commercial practice. If you're actually building a revenue generating product on the top of something, then yeah, of course, you may not want to give that away. But generally, the open source side of network fosters innovation through collaboration and also through competition. So it's something obviously to bear in mind. Where am I going with this now? Yes, a lot of people criticize the flows of Tau. You're making loads, these guys are making loads, it's disproportional. We're in a stage at the moment that I would consider to be the incentivization of network growth. We are able to really push the growth of the network to try and bring in the brightest minds, the best talent, to get out there and evangelize, pushing T, Tau pill, whatever you want to call it, as many people as we can to try and break down that stigma, which often happens within the more intellectually orientated AI community and machine learning community, when they realize that there's a token attached and it has the crypto moniker on it. And we have to break down those barriers, and we have to bring people in, and we have to make them understand, and we're blessed to be able to make them understand that they can run very profitable businesses and distribute those incentives in ways to open doors and avenues. I believe this was being discussed in a controversial space the other day, that 90% of AI companies at the moment only care about inference. That's their cost. If you can reduce inference costs, then it's a winner. Well, I'm not. As I said, I'm wearing my non-biased hat tonight. But those of you who know the things I do within the network know that we can offer huge inference at scale at the moment for nothing. It's subsidized. Those that are allowing or facilitating this inference are subsidizing builders coming in, moving companies over to work on the network. There are examples, of course, of open source companies such as New Research, who have managed to come into the network to better their outputs, to better their growth, their flow of data, at the same time, whilst allowing them to profit from the incentivization to continue to grow as a company, and obviously then incentivize internal growth and other avenues that they may be taking. So we are in this very, very lucky sort of early stage. It's not going to last. The network will become more and more competitive. As the network increases, the number of subnets will increase. And eventually we will reach an equilibrium. People always say, compare it to what happens if the price of Tau drops? Are people going to continue to mine? And we can look at Bitcoin. When the price of Bitcoin drops, some people stop mining because it's not profitable anymore. But there's always someone that comes in and will pick up that role. And through the growth of a network and the increased value, we are firm believers in the natural market equilibrium that this network will reach, all the sub networks and all the different elements of the network as they work together. So we're very, very confident that it's not a bubble that's about to burst and then everyone's going to turn off their machines. I guess, yeah, I might as well actually. I've got to have a little look. I think I've mentioned, and there's a couple of the subnets that stand out. I've written them down. I think I shuffled the order around a few times to not show any bias, and now I think I'm going to go from the end back to the beginning. What's going on the network right now that matters? I spoke obviously about the Foundation's text prompting subnet originally. Mentioned it a couple of times in this talk. It's one of these subnets that now actually I have a hard time explaining, but it's probably one of the most innovative. And even Jacob Const, I read a comment of his the other day, where even for him to explain it to someone outside of this machine learning environment, it is doing one of the most exciting things of any of subnets. And I still can't explain it to you, but it is using, I'm not going to try. It's worth looking into. I would, I don't know if Jacob is listening, or anyone here, or Crux, who's part of
I'm here.
get in there. Tell me what Subnet 1 is doing and why it's so important in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds. My God. Well, Subnet 1 has a really unique validation system where they construct a problem on the validator side and then compress that problem and give it to the miners, and then ask the miners to decompress the problem so that it's similar to the reference answer that the validators have. They construct the original question by doing retrieval first. So they go and they look in a database for some information, and they find a Wikipedia article, for instance, and they find a part of that Wikipedia article, and then they ask a question specifically about data from within inside of that Wikipedia article, like, okay, what did this general eat on this day in 1266? And then they ask that question knowing the answer to the miners, and the miners have to then go do a retrieval. They go look in their own databases, which are indexed, and collect the relevant information and construct the answer using their LLM, which can be much smaller with something like RAG, and then that gets compared to the reference answer. And so the fact that they use this sort of one-way function style validation system allows them to have really performant large language models solve difficult problems, and have a validation system which doesn't require that the validator is itself a very large language model. So it's a very interesting, and then that style of retrieval validation is being used by Cato on 5 as well for indexing. I can continue talking about how that kind of asymmetrical validation system is really cool, but yeah, that's basically it in 30 seconds.
Amazing, thank you. And what I wanted to sort of outline there to the naysayers is what that doesn't mean is there isn't just a very simple double spend of validators and miners performing the same task inefficiently just to give back a response. And from a user or from a the one thing that when Crux, who is one of the developers pioneering Subnet 1, explained in one of the, which you can find this talk online, someone sent it to me, was it's been recorded. It's just, if you look on Bittensor Hub on YouTube, you can find a lot of these. They're called TGIFs, which I always think was Thank God It's Friday, but I'm not sure it is because they're usually on a Thursday. TGIT, aren't they? But whatever. Bittensor Hub, you can find all of these calls that very often go on the main Discord. And there's one where Crux explains Subnet 1. And the thing that I took from it is the subnet will essentially allow itself to ingest queries and demands and tasks, and not only perform those tasks within that particular subnet, but also be able to understand other subnets and other modalities that it will need to reach out to and use to essentially bring together the network as a whole. And this is also one of the beautiful things that we see starting to happen is interconnected subnets. One subnet using another, whether it's to use as part of its validation process, to generate synthetic queries, to draw from its data, applications being built that use multiple subnets. And on the subject of those sorts of things, I'm not sure if it's Arash, are you in the house, Arash? Or am I going to do Subnet 8 very quickly for you? Find out.
I'm here. Can I talk?
You're all here. I love this. It's like one big family. I can't see anything, and I just call you guys out, and you arrive. 30 seconds to a minute. Tell us about Subnet 8.
Cool. Just making sure you can hear me first. Mog, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So Subnet 8, what we did is we're having miners provide deep learning machine learning models. Then they build strategies off those models and provide it to the network. And they're judged now based off of their returns from their strategies. So essentially trying to build this network that provides these really complex signals to the network. And these signals can be judged on a return basis, meaning actual performance in the market, meaning you're longing and shorting perpetual futures across Forex, indices, crypto. And we can take those signals and essentially what we are going to be doing next is the next level of essentially generating the next level of trading or modeling for financial markets, which we're calling these theta models. So essentially, like taking these quant signals that we're receiving onto the network from all these different miners, there's all these different models, and building a model, a super model on top of it, which again we're calling essentially theta models. And we believe that's essentially the future of trading, is being able to take these incredibly complex signals derived by these AI models, which are all from various miners, and they're actually usable, right? Because they're judged on the return basis, and then being able to build the next level of or next layer of modeling, which we believe will essentially disrupt financial market trading.
Awesome, thank you. I always find Subnet 8 and Arash Kaushi's use case to be an interesting one. At the beginning, it was a very strong example of how an existing idea, business, operation saw how they could utilize a distributed compute of Bittensor network to optimize and grow their operation. And then being part of the network for the time that Arash and his team have been part of the network, they've now realized the power of it. It goes beyond just their own internal operations, and of course they can use this data. But now the real value and power, or the value in the commodities that are being produced, far extends beyond what it is that they're doing, and is now being pushed out to various collaborations. And I'm not going to let this now go into but I know that they're doing a lot of things where there are a lot of other companies that they're collaborating with who are integrating this data into their trading strategies and this and that. And it's just one example. This is just one way of looking at the network. Do we have Philanthrop in the house by any chance, or am I going to do File Tower? I can do this one. That's cool. It's Subnet 21 storage. I've mentioned it a couple of times. I think it's the easiest one for us to explain because we all should understand how storage works. Easiest one to explain, not the easiest one to implement. Obviously, it turns out that once you start to implement storage across a distributed, decentralized network, where you have to ensure encryption of data and stability of data, availability of data across multiple participants. I'm sure Philanthrop and his team will attest that it's a challenge, but one that they are definitely rising to meet. And I don't think it takes too much of a stretch of the imagination to understand the value of ever-growing, exponentially growing storage within the network and the products that can be built on top of that. I've explained Subnet 6, another very interesting business model and use case, new research. We all know that they produce some of the finest fine-tuned open source models, and being able to apply their or to optimize their business model within the network, I think goes without saying that they will attest has changed their position and what it enables them to do. So I save the best to last. Do I have Namare in the house by any chance? He's probably off working. Let's see. Yeah, he's off working. So we have Subnet 19, and actually Subnet 18 and 19. I'm going to talk about both of them. Of full disclosure, I have a part in both. Subnet 18 is the one that often gets the most criticism, or is the one that's often looked at and people say, yeah, that's just a wrapper for OpenAI. Yes, it is. It is a wrapper for OpenAI. It's a wrapper for Claude 3. It's a wrapper for Gemini. It's a wrapper for any centralized API service that can be leveraged and arbitraged essentially through the network. Turns out you can take a centralized API point and you can decentralize it, where you can offer it to participants who may not have been able to access it through various restrictions. Not only that, but you are incentivizing the miners, those providing that access, to provide the best access possible. So when Subnet 18 was launched, you needed, I think, a level 3 or 4 OpenAI key to run the OpenAI element of it. Now I think it is essentially a collection of enterprise-grade keys. That alone is very useful, especially when companies such as Corcel are offering that inference or that API access completely subsidized. But where it becomes even more powerful is the generation of synthetic data. You can now create these wonderfully curated and optimized synthetic data sets, which is where the value of working with Subnet 6, new research, they're using that data to help fine-tune the models that they're fine-tuning on the network. So that's Subnet 18. It's a very useful one. And then you have Subnet 19, which is also inference, which at the moment is image-based. It's primarily image-based. I don't think I'm letting the cat out of the bag because Namare, the lead developer of this, I believe already spoke about this with Jacob last week, but we'll also be deploying the most demanded open source language LLMs. So it will have image and text inference at scale. And I'm going to stop myself there because obviously that's something I could speak about until the cows come home. Namare did a great little talk, or also a TGIF with Jacob last Thursday. So that's. Oh, do we have Caro on the line by any chance? Let's see. I've got the subnets in order of emissions, so essentially the weight that the network gives them. And I'm going down, and I'm not going to go down through all of them. That's what if anyone else was. So yeah, I'm going to stop it there because we could probably go for all 32. It's worth noting that there is a more technical deep dive into a lot of the new subnets on something called Teacher Tuesday. So this is again something that goes on the main Discord. If people always say to me, where do I stay up to date on Bittensor? The main Bittensor Discord really is the place that you want to go and hang out if you want to find out what's going on. There's all the regular shows. I think there's tomorrow night. There is a Subnet Wombo AI who are talking with Allah, and that's again also. I think it's also going to be covered on Twitter. That one. But that's really the place to go and find out and to increase your knowledge base and connect with people and understand more of what's going on the network. So beyond the subnets, it's worth just talking on the current state of the network about accessing the network. I speak about accessing the network and requiring having a validator in order to access the network. And access must be through a validator. However, validators are able to build APIs, and we have the creation of essentially access marketplaces being undertaken by a number of participants within the network, which will allow validators to resell their bandwidth. So as a validator, rather than having to build an ecosystem that allows people to, or an API to access the network, they will actually be able to just resell on the open marketplace their bandwidth or allocations of their bandwidth to any participant, anyone that wishes to come in and purchase that. And then you have companies like Corcel that provide API access to a number of subnets. And they're working much more on inference at scale, so trying to sort of provide the same reliability that you would get if you were to build on OpenAI or build on Claude directly, go in and just generate an API key and have access to the network. And then you have certain subnets that are building that themselves within their own subnets that allows you to access that data directly. So that's, in terms of accessing the network, the easiest place to start would be Corcel. But if you have an interest in any particular subnet and you dive into that code, you will find more information. And most should, if they're not allowing public APIs, should be working through their own validator or opening up the commodities that they produce to the world. I think I've almost covered it. What I've got little things in the future. Interconnected subnets through the initiatives being pioneered by Subnet 1, by the usefulness of data being shared across subnets, as we've seen with 6 and 18 and 16, and 19 and 16. There's a whole bunch of little relationships being formed where people are starting to realize that, hey, your subnet works very well with my subnet. The value of that commodity that you're producing enables me to add more value to my commodity. So that's definitely going on. And what's now happening is the network is starting to ramp up users. It sometimes is hard to quantify that, or has been. It's very easy for us to talk about the throughput of network, the number of images created, the number of inferences fulfilled, the amount of storage available. But when you start to understand, as mentioned, that these subnets have been in existence for a maximum of 4 months, a maximum, and some of them a month, weeks, not more than a couple of months. If you think of what it takes, the time it takes to build a company, ship a product, bring that product to market, test it, make it reliable, and then get it out at scale, you start to understand that some of the subnets deserve to be cut a little bit of slack. We don't. We're pushing it. Everyone's being pushed, but you can expect some pretty substantial growth from the network over the coming months. As things really start to ramp up. I know internally ourselves, I'm thinking this area, I'm very, very excited for all the stuff that's coming out. And I feel like at the moment, it's a very much a snowball effect. And everyone is starting to realize quite a few months of hard work, and things are really starting to push forward. Yeah, I think I'm probably about done. I don't think I need to, I think I'll open it up to questions, any questions. And then if there aren't any.
I had a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about Tau and value accrual to Tau and the network, and I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but as an investor or a Tau holder, what metrics can we observe or track to analyze the success of the network and of Tau? Is there any performance metrics that we can look at that are available just to understand what's going on from an analytical point of view? Thanks.
Okay, very good question. And this is an interesting one because, of course, in the traditional sense, we want to see transactions on a blockchain network. We want to see users. Well, that's an easy one because every interaction or scoring or on a subnet involves a blockchain transaction. So that's a cheat. I could put you in the direction of extrinsics, so the transactions on the chain, and say, look at that. But that's just the network functioning. Then we could look at users and we could say, okay, well, let's have a look at users. Who's actually using the apps? Well, actually, Corcel and the apps, the chat app and the image studio app they have, and some of the new apps they've got coming out, has got some pretty impressive numbers for a small startup. But it's such a small percentage of what the network is doing and capable of that I, again, wouldn't consider it to be a sole representative of the performance and organic or the usage of the network. So then you could say, well, let's look at pull requests and sort of GitHub activity. And I saw a metric the other day from another crypto project that was trying to put in the forefront their network's GitHub activity by putting the number of pull requests on that GitHub, and they used for Bittensor the Open Tensor Foundation's GitHub as a representative of the activity within the Bittensor ecosystem, and it was laughable because obviously there's 32 subnets, but there aren't just 32 teams anymore. There's now a thriving testnet of people who have who are waiting to get onto the mainnet, who have been on the mainnet and lost their slot and waiting to get back on again. So the hive of developer activity as a metric for growth is huge. And then we understand the need for something simpler and easier to understand. So this is what we try and do on Taostats. You can look at the amount of Tau being recycled by miners. This is the price that people are willing to pay to participate and produce commodities on the network. You can also, or what we'll try to do, is a new version of Taostats. I'll drop it here. Say it. There is a new Taostats that we have been working on for months that will be coming out imminently. Not quite yet, at least. Should I say a month? I'm not committing to any time frames. Less than a month, maybe a month. And the purpose and what we're going to be doing with that, once subnets start to really establish themselves as mainstays as a network, is we're going to be assigning teams to really research into those subnets and assign specific quantifiable data metric value to those subnets, which of course needs to be done on a subnet by subnet basis because each subnet's value is different. Even if we just looked at inference between 18 and 19, we could come out with the numbers of organic queries, so who's actually using it, or queries. But then it turns out that the value of 18 is a huge synthetic data set, and it's the actual size of that data set. It's the usage of that data set. Vision 19 is making a huge embeddings library. Something like FileTow is expanding into huge petabytes and petabytes of data. So you have to look at each individual subnet. And I think at some point, as the evolution of Tau moves into S-Tau and dynamic Tau, we will be forced to actually start to weigh up the viability of each individual subnet rather than the network as a whole. And obviously that will equate to the greater value of the network as a whole. So it's not easy because of the distribution amongst subnets, and there's so much going on. It makes it hard to come up with a singular metric and say, well, it's that. God forbid anyone says it's price, because that's not a just representation of where this network is going. As anyone who's been here long enough through sideways price action, or let's leave price alone, it's not the best metric. I don't know if that answers your question, or it just makes your question harder for you to answer and provides avenues for which to go down.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions, still?
Yeah, I had a question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question, but just something that I've been seeing online. So it seems like we're moving into this new space or narrative where crypto projects aren't so easy to follow. The timeline for you guys to build something, or they're not you, but the subnets are obviously way more far out than the average degen or crypto investor is used to. We go from projects being white mapped and put out in 30 days to with these new AI protocols and projects, they're going to take quite some time to build. So it's all starting to get a little hard to follow. There's so much going on. How do you guys see the investors or the market being able to keep the attention towards Bittensor? Because these the subnets aren't going to be able to produce a product in 30 days. I mean, some of this stuff is going to take years potentially. So it just seems like, how are we going to keep the attention going if this is going to take so long to become available to the public?
Okay, I like this question. I believe that I can speak for many participants of the network when we say that the attention span of investors is not our priority. And with all due respect, I actually think this network is delivering at a much faster scale, speed and time than so many crypto projects that run out a roadmap over a number of Q1s to Q4s over a couple of years with some sort of abstract goals as to what they may do. And having been in crypto since 2017 and always having been someone that looked at revenue, potential revenue, actual path to revenue and realization of revenue versus just an abstract idea of how revenue might be achieved one day or how usefulness and adoption might be achieved. The things that are being built on this network are advancing as fast as the AI industry that it's attached to is going. And right now, I'm seeing people come along with subnet ideas and pick up Bittensor within a couple of months, have subnets out there. And okay, it takes a little bit longer to really come up with polished projects. As I was speaking to Arash earlier, and he, his subnet was at about 4 months old now. 18 and 19, same thing. But I mean, compared to what I've seen going on in some of the crypto projects that I've been following for a number of years, that I spend less and less time watching, I don't look at them and think, wow, we're slow, we're lagging behind you guys. The speed of development here and the professionalism, bearing in mind that it isn't the core developer space within Bittensor aren't crypto bros and degens, and therefore the quality of work reflects that. I see a much higher standard of quality going on now that things are really starting to get going. At the beginning, It's open, Wild West. There's a lot of incentivization on the table and people coming in to make the most of it. But as things start to ramp up and get serious, these are serious development teams coming on board, and I don't think that we're going to have, this is a project that goes on for more than, if you look at the project in terms of investment cycle, it's an unfortunate, or it is what it is, that we have obviously a token, therefore we are aligned to crypto and crypto cycles. But I can tell you, I wake up in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the night, and I pick up my phone and I don't check the price of Tau or my crypto prices anymore. I only check that my validators are running, how they're performing, how the network is performing at that given time. And there's a lot of other people that find themselves in this same boat. Obviously, there are the personas, the investors, and I think they have to make their own choices as to what is, investment choices are. If you feel it's a difficult one, someone said to me, why is the price going down? I said, well, there's a lot of people that bought and now they want to move on to the next thing and the next thing. I said, well, are you? I said, no, I don't have time for that. I'm not in crypto anymore. I build on Bittensor. I've stopped with crypto a couple of years ago when I discovered this rabbit hole. So everyone is entitled to pursue the path that they want, but I'm not worried about the speed of development within the Bittensor ecosystem.
No, I appreciate the response. I love. I'm not in crypto anymore. I build on Bittensor. That's where it's at.
Got a t-shirt for that. Anyone else?
Mog, I've got a question for you. We're a data provider on Subnet 8 here at Lunar Crush for social data. So we provide that to the miners. And you mentioned earlier in the talk a little bit about potentially how holders can kind of signal. If you're a holder of Tau, you can kind of signal towards one subnet. But is that, I've heard that there will be no tokens created for the different subnets. Maybe that would change, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how you think about how a holder would kind of signal value towards one of the subnets.
Thank you. Good question. I was amazed. I thought there's no way we're going to get through an hour and a half to 2 hours with no one asking me about the evolution of the assignment of emissions, S-tau, D-tau, and all of that. I'm going to be abstract in some ways because I always prefer to really go deep on things that are factual. So when we have things on paper. So for those of you that are listening for the Eli 5 part of this and have no idea where this line of conversation comes from, as mentioned, emissions for subnets are currently decided by the validators on subnet 0. That's part of the evolution of subnets itself, and we come to learn that I wouldn't say it's a flawed design, but it's not the direction that we want the network to continue into the future. It has its pros and its cons, and the eventual direction that is sort of, optimum for the network is that the network decides through, as I keep saying, natural market forces as to where the flow of Tau will go. The reason that this is on the table at the moment is around December, Jacob dropped an initial proposal, an idea for something called D-tau, dynamic tau. And it was a lot of ideas. He was putting the ideas out there to get a lot of feedback from the community, from the people inside the community, outside the community, the public, to understand and evolve this proposal. D-tau stands for dynamic tau, and some of the mechanics of it were that you would be required to exchange or acquire a representative token of the subnets themselves, and that would the flow of these tokens and the acquiral of these tokens would govern the flow of emissions. The proposal is out there. However, I know full well that this proposal is being worked on, adapted, and this was the version 1 and it was put out in December. So I don't feel that we should overanalyze anything in that proposal now. I personally feel that that proposal is where we should be going, but we have a path to there. And I believe that's echoed by the foundation and by Jacob, which is why currently what's on the table is something called STAO, which is state TAO. And that is the little brother of dynamic TAO, in that everyone stakes TAO already. We all stake TAO to whatever validator we choose, but then we trust in the validator to assign those emissions. And there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have a say. We always say if you don't like where your validator is staking TAO, you don't have to stake with that validator. But we're talking percentage points, and most delegators don't fully understand the choice of where and why a validator is delegating to one, or staking to assigning emissions to one subnet versus another. So what this will allow the delegators to do is they will essentially, rather than just staking to a validator, they will stake to validators and on specific subnets. So you can then put your more of a weight to a given subnet and specifically a given validator on a given subnet. Again, this is not on paper, or it's not on paper that I've seen. This is in discussion phase. And what happens with these discussions is, of course, an idea goes out. It's a strong idea, and then, as should be in all technical ideas, anyone who understands the idea tries to think about how we can break it and how it might break. And I think that this is what's currently on the discussion table, exploring all the different angles for it, how it might work. But the overall, or the overarching ethos behind it is that you, as holders of TAO, will have a greater say in where the emissions flow towards subnets. Does that answer the question?
Understood. Thank you very much.
No problem. Any other questions? Excellent. I feel like I'm going to get one from my wife in a minute asking if I'm coming to bed. So it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been very strange. I'm used to being on Spaces and seeing this big list of everyone flicking through and saying, oh, who's here, who's not. And it's been very, very surreal because I cannot see any of you. It's literally been like I've just been talking to my computer for an hour and a half, other than these voices when I summon them appearing. So assuming there was more than just Jacob and a couple of people asking questions, thank you very much for taking the time to come and listen to this. I hope it was useful. Feel free to DM me with abuse, comments, and feedback. And any questions, you can find me on the main Discord, Mog Machine, on Telegram, Mog Machine, on Twitter, Mog Machine. It's a reoccurring thing here. And this has been recorded, so feel free to listen to it again just before Thanksgiving dinner, so you can explain to your parents what the hell a decentralized incentivized machine learning network really is all about. But unless anyone has any final questions, I'm going to bid you all thank you and good night.